Power of Babel, the podcast where nothing's off the table. From Bible mysteries and strange phenomena to the questions that keep you up at night, we explore it all with curiosity and faith. I'm your host, Courtney, joined by my co-hosts Caleb and Jeremy. Together, we dive into the weird, the wonderful, and the wildly curious. So grab your coffee, open your mind, and let's babble. Hey everyone, welcome back to the Power of Babel. So glad that you joined us. We're here for another episode. How y'all doing today?
Doing pretty good.
Doing well?
Pretty good.
It's a lovely day outside. I'm really excited for some warmer weather.
Yeah.
And some sunshine. So we have an interesting episode today. We're going to do a little bit of a Q&A. I will say we need some more engagement from you guys. We on social media, we asked all of you to send us questions about episodes we've done before, episodes, just questions that you have that we haven't discussed. And I didn't get any back on social media. So shame on you.
Yeah.
You should be doing more. Do your part as a viewer and listener.
We know that you're viewing and listening.
Yeah.
Because we see the stats. But this is your call to action. Follow us on social media.
Absolutely.
Because I think that's the problem. A lot of our viewers and listeners are not following us on socials.
Maybe
Yeah.
not.
Or
So give us a follow.
Maybe we're just answering all the questions.
No,
We're doing a great job.
I like that.
That's what it is. Pat me on the back.
Yeah.
I'm carrying this podcast, we know. Okay, so but we did get at least one listener, shout out, you know who you are, that gave us some questions. And I actually have a confession. I just chat GPT'd it.
Oh no.
I said, listen, you know us on the Power of Babel.
No, how embarrassing.
You know who we are because we're so famous.
I don't even know if we should answer these questions now.
They really weren't that great. I had to alter them myself
Sickening.
a little bit. Yeah, they kind of sucked. But I just said, all of the episodes we've done so far, what are some questions that viewers might have because we don't really know what they have because they haven't answered.
Yeah.
So, and I've compiled some, and we'll just ask some questions, and some might take a long time, some might not, and we'll just see where this episode takes us. I'm a little nervous about it, actually. Okay, let me think of where we should start. Ugh. Well, you said you had a question, Jeremy. Do you want to let's start with yours because I feel like this will be a fun one to kickstart us.
This is a question from a human, so it's better.
From you?
So, yeah, from me. What have y'all been reading lately?
More than one thing. I've been reading some things for seminary class.
I'm going to set ground rules here. One fun thing,
Okay.
one like serious work or study related thing.
Okay. So the fun thing, I'll give you that first. I've been reading through the Iliad.
Okay.
And going to be reading through the Odyssey in preparation for the movie that's coming out. So yeah, just rereading through that. I've read it in the past before, but I really love I like epic poetry.
Yeah.
I know you're a poetry guy, but I really love epic poetry. So yeah, I've been reading the Iliad. The Iliad and the Odyssey is really kind of amazing because it is from a pagan culture, obviously, but there are still some very rich theological and philosophical questions that sort of come up for the reader.
Mm-hmm.
And I just also they're just a lot of fun. So that's my fun one.
Okay.
Yeah, some light reading, the Homeric epics. Yeah.
It can be light reading, yeah.
Okay.
Maybe.
I'll hit you with my fun one because it's the same. Caleb talked me into reading the Iliad because I've never read either of those. I don't know a lot about just history in general. That's something I've been trying to work on as a personal goal, I guess, of mine. So I don't really know much at all about what's actually happening. So I guess it's kind of cool in that I'm really going into it blind, I feel like.
Yeah.
And I am enjoying how it differs so much with like the gods in the story and like Yahweh.
Right.
And just like the stark difference.
Yeah.
Specifically how they are so in tune might not be the word, but just so involved with humanity. And not that Yahweh isn't involved, but I guess maybe like the free will aspect of it all. And I'm not super far into the book, as far as I probably should be at this point. But yeah, I've been enjoying it.
Sweet.
I had
Yeah.
to trudge through the first little bit, but there's just so many characters in it that I'm just like, it's a
Yeah,
lot.
it's a mix because I mean, the Homeric epics are mytho history. Maybe that's a tease for a future episode. I don't know.
Oh,
But yeah, mytho historical. So it's sort of a weaving together of what a lot of scholars think are real historical events.
Mm-hmm.
Some kind of Trojan War, but then also the mythology behind how they think of the way that the gods sort of not just interact but dictate the way that things
yeah.
happen. That's what you're talking about with the
They're
Right.
free will stuff.
like puppeteers.
Yeah,
They're just
Right.
like manipulating
yeah. Very interesting.
humanity. Yeah,
Yeah, that's
cool.
a fun one.
What's fun that you're reading? Do you have a fun one?
Let me see here. So I finished reading recently a manga called Takopi's Original Sin,
We knew it was going to be manga.
Of course.
which, as the name implies, is a deep dive into like the human condition of fallibility. But the setup
Okay.
is kind of interesting. It seems really nice and cute and lighthearted. There's like a little octopus alien that comes to Earth, and all this thing wants to do is spread happiness. And it meets this
Wow.
young
How can you be mad at
child.
that?
Yeah, how could you be mad? And then it meets this young child who's very unhappy for many reasons and tries to make her happy, but it gets very dark and very it's in the end it ends up being a very heavy but very meaningful meditation on human fallibility and the way that you can't really have the ends justify the means. And the only way out of destructive cycles of seeking happiness or whatever is requires some kind of sacrifice,
Mm.
Mm.
selfless sacrifice. So that was actually really good. It's very heavy, emotionally heavy, very kind of in your face. But yeah, that was a good read.
Nice.
Okay, yeah. I like that our fun things have lots of like heavy themes, like heavy
Yeah,
theological
most of
themes.
my fun readings are not like this, but because I committed to it, I also have just packed away all of my books. We're in the process of
Hmm.
moving, hopefully, if we sell our house. And so, yeah, that was another stupid thing I did
Yeah.
was all of my books are packed away. So I'm kind of like I have to finish the Iliad and then my other book that I'm reading.
Yeah,
So
I feel you.
yeah,
So in terms of the not fun reading, well, it depends on how
I
you
wouldn't
look
say
at
not
it.
fun.
It depends on how you look at it.
Studious
Yeah.
reading.
For a seminary class that I've been taking, I was reading a book on the integration of behavioral science and theology,
Okay,
which, to be honest with you,
doesn't
isn't.
sound very fun to
Yeah,
me.
It sounds very misguided, but go on.
well, it's definitely not something that I would have ever read on my own.
Yeah.
But the class was it was a psychology adjacent class
Hmm.
about related to like pastoral counseling, that sort of thing.
Hmm.
Which again is not necessarily a super interest of mine. I've taken some other courses, similar courses before, but this one was about really was it may not be misguided because a lot of it was the question of can these things be integrated?
Okay.
Should they be integrated? And really, what the book really kind of lands on is only if we redefine what integration means, because we don't want to mix them in a haphazard way,
Okay.
but rather what we want to do is we want to glean whatever good might come from something like the behavioral sciences through the lens of theology,
Okay.
which I thought was a helpful approach.
So integration is good as long as it's not actually integration.
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. We have to redefine what integration means, but under the definition that provided, I thought it was an interesting book. I didn't agree with every bit of it, but
Mm.
it was an interesting class.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
So
What about you, Jeremy?
I recently read an essay that I actually taught in class. So I teach writing. That was by the last name was Greisinger. It's Why Read Harry Potter, and it was
oh
a Christian
Oh,
professor in the early 2000s. So in the midst of like Harry Potter mania, had decided to put Harry Potter on her syllabus for children's literature, and it was a class for training teachers
okay.
and teaching them about children's literature and how and what it was, different things. And so she had as a result of that, she experienced a lot of blowback and
Yeah.
decided eventually to write this essay about her reasoning for why she chose to teach Harry Potter in a children's literature class at a Christian college. It's one of those things that, like,
Interesting.
I am not totally convinced by it, but she has some good reasons. It's a reasonable essay, and it's interesting too because she does a really good job of, like, tracking down at the time, like, um, the cultural milieu and the, what was going on with Harry Potter mania and some of the misinformation that was circling.
Mm.
Like, one of the things she mentioned was there was, like, an Onion article that was circulating that was saying, like, the first Church of Satan in Salem, Massachusetts was getting millions of applicants because of Harry Potter,
Yeah.
and people were unironically citing this as evidence that Harry Potter was evil, but it was from the Onion, so it was
Yeah.
just
I'm
satire.
still
That's
amazed
hilarious.
at the number of people who still share
Yeah.
Onion articles as though they are not satirical.
That's like what's the
Babylon Bee.
Babylon
Yeah.
Bee? It's
Yes.
so funny.
So
There
funny.
was somebody on my feed one time that kept I don't even remember who it was at this point, but they kept sharing it, and it was not in their eyes
There was
satirical when they
no
were sharing
irony.
it.
Yeah.
Like they were literally
Like it was a
it's
news source. Yeah.
crazy. Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So funny.
Well, okay, before I share my book, I am curious. Here's a question that I have. What is your stance on Harry Potter?
Ooh. What do you think, Jerry? You've been thinking about it more than I have.
I don't really have a firsthand take because I haven't read Harry Potter or watched the movies.
Okay.
But
That's fair.
I am kind of at the point to where I could see how, especially for teachers who are interacting with children. So in her specific case that she was talking about, I am convinced it is probably good for them to, understand this and look at it because at least at the time nowadays, you could probably bring up something else that's controversial, but at least at the time that was like it was pervasive, it was everywhere. And if
Yeah.
you're teaching kids about literature, then that's something you should probably know about.
Mm.
My own stance is that my is kind of like a broader thing. Um, if I feel like a work is actively trying to indoctrinate me into the occult or witchcraft, whether that be the mentality or the actual practice, I kind of set that as like over the line.
Mm.
But I think it is possible to talk about like, wizards and spells and stuff without actually doing that.
Yeah. Yeah.
So it really just depends. And this is a case by case basis, right?
Yeah.
Um, I think that some Christians can probably read Harry Potter just fine, possibly. Um, Me personally, I've always been kind of hesitant, and that is one of the things that like I am sensitive to because I love to read like fantasy stuff like
Yeah.
that. And there have been some books that I've like put down because I feel like it was crossing that line. Yeah, it's a really interesting question as to what where the line is as far as what the Bible's prohibitions against witchcraft and occultism and spells and necromancy and all that kind of stuff. How do those apply to not just to the current day, but to current day works of fiction?
Yeah. The consumption of media.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So you have two different questions there, which I mean this could be a whole episode, but
I was gonna
Yeah.
say actually we might actually could do something like because Jeremy and I have even recently had some conversations about cultural engagement with certain materials or certain traditions or certain things, and media I think would fall under that as well.
Yeah.
Where there is a question of conscience. And there are some New Testament texts, particularly in Paul's letters, that may shed some light on at least how you should approach and navigate the issue. It may not give you a strict yes or no. Oh, this is good, this is bad, but it may give you some tools for how to navigate that kind of thing. I'm kind of in the same boat with Jeremy on it, in the sense that I've never read it, so and not because I don't think that that I think it would be a bad thing to read Harry Potter. I mean, I'm sure some of our listeners and viewers are rolling their eyes at even the suggestion that it might be objectionable for a Christian to do that.
Well, there might be others that are listening that
Yeah.
are like,
her
I
on
mean,
the
a
other
lot of my friends growing up were not allowed. I mean, and
Right.
even I don't even know that my parents. I was never interested in reading it, but I could see them being like, "Nah, I don't. Let's not read that."
Yeah.
I remember it was not at this church as far as I can recall, but at a different church there was like an informational session one Sunday between the
Really?
services where someone played a video that said basically it was like interviewing like various Wiccan practitioners and saying, yeah, J.K. Rowling like studied up on Wiccan, and this is basically 100% what we believe, and it's teaching kids how to do it,
Mhm.
which I am fairly confident
That's
is
not the
not
case.
true.
Yeah.
Yeah, I've only read, and I read it recently, and the reason I read it was because when I was in as a media specialist in elementary
Mhm,
school, I mean Harry Potter is still super
mhm.
popular
Mm.
amongst young people, and so I was like, I probably should. I mean, I didn't build this library; I just came into it, but I was like, I should probably read
Be
this if my
aware of it.
kids are
Yeah.
reading it. So I read, I think, the first two. I didn't. Fantasy's not my genre. Didn't hate it, but just didn't like. My husband loves Harry Potter.
Mhm.
That's why I asked the question. So, but I do believe that. I mean, some of it's kind of scary. Like,
Yeah.
I don't know that I would necessarily have it in my elementary. That might be controversial.
Well, before Harry Potter, the controversy was around R.L. Stein's Goosebumps.
Yeah.
Oh,
If
super
y'all,
popular still.
yeah,
Yeah.
Still, yeah.
and the thing was, and I mean, they even made an Arthur episode. If y'all remember Arthur the cartoon,
Mm.
that was
Loved
like that was
Arthur.
basically
We're showing our
about.
age for real now.
Yeah, yeah,
This is kind of sad.
we got certified unk status. If you don't know what that means, ask your young kid.
So sorry,
And
I have
we
to get that. Go ahead.
So yeah, in the they made an episode of Arthur about this controversy. That it was so big, and it was like, and a lot of the conversation was the same thing it was with Harry Potter, right? Like, oh, this getting kids to read isn't that great, and other people saying, yeah, but like, what are they reading? And it was like, is this too scary for kids? Or are they getting morbidly fascinated with like
Yeah.
horror and zombies and weird stuff like that? And it's like,
Yeah.
it's always something, right? There's always some kind of moral panic, and some of those have a legitimate basis, some of them don't. A lot of them are just proxies for larger social anxieties that people don't
Mm,
actually want to confront. But
yeah.
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 So it is gonna get. Maybe we can do an episode
Yeah. I would like to do that
on
episode.
something
yeah,
like this,
Yeah.
because because the conversations we've had is like, what about Christian participation in things like Halloween,
yeah.
right?
Mm,
Things
Oh
like
yeah, yeah.
that.
That's good.
I think these are related
Yeah,
questions that
yeah.
there
Yeah.
may be, and ultimately it's going to boil down to a certain extent to a matter of
yeah,
conscience. But there are definitely some biblical insights that
yeah.
we can
Yeah.
look to.
Yeah.
Cour-
Okay.
Courtney, what have you been reading for like
Yeah.
for serious?
So for
For
serious, it
serious.
was a recommendation by Caleb. I feel like a lot of my serious books are recommendations from Caleb. It's a book called Knowing God
Mm-hmm.
by, is it J.I. Packer? Is that
J.I.
who it is?
Packer. Yep.
Yeah, I'm not super far into it. If I'm honest, I've not been doing good just reading in general. Life has been crazy for me, so that's something I'm really trying to work on. But so I haven't gotten too deep into it, but I am enjoying it so far. There's been a couple of things that have made me be like, what is this guy really saying? I don't really know that I believe that. But yeah, I've enjoyed it so far. Have you read it before?
I have read it. It's been a while.
Okay, yeah.
I
It's super
remember.
short. It's not very long. I just
Right.
need to finish
Yeah.
it.
I,
need
I
to read it.
remember I remember it being, yeah, it was good.
Yeah.
But yeah, when I read some of those books, like there's like Bonhoeffer's Cost of Discipleship is
Yeah.
one where he like comes out really strongly against like soloist in church music,
Oh,
weirdly.
really?
Yeah.
Interesting.
Yeah, and it's, every now and then you run across like a Christian classic, and I consider Packer's Knowing God a Christian classic.
Yeah.
And
Definitely.
then there's like a weird take in there. And it's like, I could see how someone might think this, but that is not at all what I think. And I haven't
Yeah.
even necessarily, like heard that
Yeah.
before.
Well, I'm gonna. It's the first question that I'm gonna ask. So, but I do. You mentioned something, Bonhoeffer. What is another? I don't think I've read The Cost of Discipleship. Is there another big hitter that he's wrote? I've read something from him, and it
There,
was a small little book. Was it The Cost of Discipleship that I read?
you
Um,
may have read that's the most popular one that people most often recommend. He had some other good works as well, but the other thing I would recommend, if you've read The Cost of Discipleship, is read a good biography on Bonhoeffer, because I
Yeah.
think he's one of these figures where his life is really almost as interesting as his theology.
Yeah.
Because of the context that he was in.
Mm,
So yeah, a good biography on his life would be a good
yeah.
recommendation for me.
We also need to do an episode on. I'm just having all these revelations now. We just need to do an episode on this topic because I feel
On
like we could just
book
keep talking
recommendations,
about
yeah,
books that we've
yeah,
read.
for sure.
And yeah, so I was gonna go somewhere else, but let's just move on.
What-
Okay, so the question I had from reading the book Knowing God, I think this is like his first chapter. He was talking about visual representations of really the Trinity, I think, as a whole. I think he went in a little bit just on Jesus. Um, but should we, are we allowed to, should we use visual aids? And I think sorry, I'm like all over the place. Specifically, he was talking about in worship settings,
Right.
but he kind of went super far with it to say there shouldn't be, unless I read it wrong, there
Mm.
shouldn't be any visual representations of God, the Trinity, anything.
Right.
And I was like, I don't know that I necessarily believe that. What are y'all's thoughts? And I don't know.
Yeah.
So visual representation, just to put it out there, so that probably also that covers like paintings,
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
drawings, probably movies and TV,
Yeah,
probably
yeah.
right.
Yeah.
I was thinking, like, I thought back to our episode on like the art.
Mm-hmm.
So any kind of art. Well, then it's like, okay, music. We represent, that I just like, where's the line?
Right.
And also,
I
I
think
think it's visual was what he was
yeah,
saying.
what
But
he had in mind was visual representation, and the reason why, and it's been a long time since I've read the book, but I've read it a few times. That what he's representing, I think, is actually a fairly common to his tradition, right? So
okay, I don't know anything about him.
so Packer is a like a sort of high reformed theologian, which is he's confessionally reformed, is what I mean by that. And which means he's a Calvinist, and they have a certain understanding of the way that they that they read Scripture. And typically, I say typically because this is not universal. You will find Reformed people who fall on either side of this issue, but there is a strong tradition among the Reformed who interpret the second commandment, which is the prohibition against the use of graven images and so forth. They will interpret that in a pretty conservative, really strict kind of way, in the way that you described, which is to say, really, we shouldn't be making these images at all. We shouldn't be making whether they're for the expressed intention of worship or not.
It's giving like what he says is like a false representation because we can't fully
Right.
understand all that is to God.
Right, and
Yeah.
so the claim here
Which I
is you
get.
shouldn't make any kind of image. Where fall on that issue is really to say that I think that the commandment is prohibiting the use of images in the context of worship.
Mm.
Right.
I don't think that it's making a more broad claim, particularly when it comes to the person of Christ. And this is why I say this. I'm not sure how I feel about someone making a purported image of God the Father or the Holy Spirit. I really don't even know how you could do that, because we those persons of the triune God, from our perspective, are the invisible God.
Mm.
Jesus, in the theology of the New Testament, is the invisible God made visible. This is
Right.
what John's prologue is all about, right? He says the God that Moses and the patriarchs could not look upon has been made visible in the incarnation.
Mm-hmm.
And it's because he has become incarnate, that he's become a human, that we can look upon him. And also there's the deeper element, which is that we can physically look upon him if you were in the first century in that part of the world, but
Yeah.
also because he is revealing the fullness of God in the person of Christ.
Mm-hmm.
So there's a sense in which we see God
Yeah.
in a new way. So I would say that there probably are contexts in which some kind of a visual representation of what we would say this represents Jesus.
Mm-hmm.
I don't see necessarily that would be objectionable. Where I would see it as objectionable is if we then incorporated that into some sort of act of worship or piety.
So
Yeah.
somebody makes a painting of Jesus and then like bows down and treats it as if it were, God, or as if it were, holy
Right.
in and of itself. Yeah.
Yeah.
I will say though, there are representations, symbolic representations of the Father and the Holy Spirit, right? Like the dove. There's
Yeah.
all kinds
True.
of Christian art
Yeah.
with the dove. And even something like, like the heavens parting and a beam of light coming down, or like, or and, Da Vinci's, there's
Oh yeah,
paintings
yeah, yeah,
where
yeah.
like is it
Where
the
The
creation,
creation of
fingers,
God.
Adam,
yeah.
where the
Mhm,
fingers
mhm,
touching? Yeah,
Mhm.
there's a representation of the Father there.
mhm.
There's all kinds of things, and but that example does show us that this has not been the normative understanding, like the default understanding of this issue, for all branches of Christianity throughout all of history, right?
Yeah.
There's plenty of Christian art that especially depicts Jesus, but
Yeah.
also the Father and the Spirit. I would say so there are two ways to go at this and to say why that might be a misguided notion. First is, and this is the weaker one of the two, but I still think it's valid, is in look at that understanding of the second commandment as a historical artifact. Because and there's the fact that it comes from the Reformed theological camp is significant because one of the things historically that they had to do to distinguish themselves from Catholicism, right? Because this is part of the Protestant Reformation, all of that was that one of the wedge issues, one of the early wedge issues, was the use of images in worship. And of course, Catholicism was totally fine with that, even encouraged it. The Reformers said, no, this is a type of idolatry.
Mm.
And at the time, that was one of the things that made them distinctive. And so it makes sense that this would be carry through in their DNA up to the present point. Now, that doesn't say they were wrong. It just says that maybe this is a historical artifact, right? Maybe they were mad or they disagreed with the Catholics about like salvation by works or faith. That's an oversimplification. But they were mad about that, and maybe they also said they were mad about this, but this wasn't really an issue if we could have isolated it from that. The second thing is that the Bible clearly, and this is a broader point for defending the visual arts in general, because there are some Christians that look at that commandment and say we should not make paintings of anything. We should not have statues of anything, right? Because it
Which is
says,
really crazy.
but it says no graven
Wow.
image, right? You shall not make an image. Some people interpret that as a ban on visual art entirely.
Wow.
But look at the Bible and the context, right? The construction of the tabernacle and the temple. God has the people doing that make representations, visual representations, statues and carved work of terrestrial physical objects like fruit and bulls and things like that, but also in the Holy of Holies
Yeah.
on the ark,
The ark. Yeah.
cherubim,
That's right.
who are supernatural beings.
Yeah.
That's true.
And so the idea that this is supposed to prohibit any kind of visual art is absurd.
Mm.
And you can make the case that, well, they didn't have a visual representation of Jesus because Jesus wasn't around yet, right?
Right.
And that wasn't open to them, and there would be a reason why they would not want to make a representation of God,
Yeah.
and that would not have been a good idea at the time because God in the flesh, the image of the invisible God, had not yet come among them.
But I would say a couple things. Well, first of all, while the invisible God had not been made visible because the incarnation had not occurred, there is this strong theological thread in the Old Testament of the angel of the Lord.
I was about to ask
That's
that
true,
'cause
right?
I just read about this.
Yeah, so
in my
so
my
the
readings.
the angel of Yahweh,
Mhm.
and then it in one text in particular in Joshua, which is they don't use the term the angel of Yahweh, but the captain of the Lord's hosts.
Yeah.
Right. There are a few examples of this, several examples of this actually in the Old Testament, where Yahweh has been made visible. And also Yahweh is distinct from Yahweh invisible in those scenes,
Right.
which leads to the Jewish idea of the two powers in heaven, which we may have even talked about in other episodes. I'm sure we have. But the idea is that I think what that shows is that in principle, the idea that God could be made visible is not ruled out in the Old Testament. It's actually affirmed.
That's true. Yeah.
And what I think Jeremy's point about the images, because the commandment rules out making images of anything in heaven, right? But because of the fact that the cherubim are heavenly creatures and that there are images made of that, I think what this shows is that the commandment, the prohibition of the commandment is narrower than just making the image.
Well, it has to be narrower.
Yes.
Because bulls, the bulls were supposed to support the sea, the basin for the wash basin,
Right.
basically. But bulls were very, very prominent in pagan iconography of deities.
Oh, yes.
Right?
Yes.
And so this is a thing that is meant to be in the temple, that is an image of something that in a different context could be taken as a pagan god
That's
or a
right.
representation for a pagan god.
Yeah.
But we still, God is still the one saying, "No, make some, some bronze bulls holding up the sea. This
Yeah.
is what I want." And so but the distinction is, that like this is not being worshipped as an object in itself.
That's what I was gonna say.
It
Is
is
Yeah.
part of the furnishings of a place where worship
the
Yeah.
happens.
more narrow understanding of the commandment is that not that the images themselves can't be made, but that, or even that they can't occupy a space where worship is done. It's that they cannot be objects of worship,
Yes.
Yeah.
right?
Well, so
Yeah.
that brings me to I have two questions and I don't want to lose them. So let
Hmm.
me ask them. Well, the first one is when you talk about bulls. So I think he mentions this in the chapter 2 about them worshiping making the golden calf and
Right.
worshiping it while Moses is on the mountain.
Hmm.
So he mentioned something like that they had made that not when I've read that I've thought okay it's like a pagan idol that they're making. He makes the claim that they're actually making it to worship Yahweh
Yes,
with this, and
I,
I've never thought about that
I think he's
before.
correct. And
Okay.
the reason why I think he's correct is because when the incident occurs, and then later Aaron says the calf walked out of the fire, which I always find very amusing. But when this occurs, they say, and I think even Aaron says it, but they say, "This is Yahweh whom delivered you out of Egypt."
Is it okay? This
He was shaking his head, so I'm
we
curious
we
his
would have to go
thoughts.
back to the original language because I have seen it translated. These are the gods who led you out of Egypt, but it could be Elohim,
So it is
which
it.
is
I think now I don't have the text in front of me, but I'm pretty sure it's Elohim,
Elohim. Yeah.
Which
which
can
is
also it's just gods
which
in
is
general.
plural. See, this is the reason why sometimes it's translated this way is
Yeah.
because Elohim, the word, is plural. Let me put it this way: it can be plural or singular depending on the
Yeah.
context. And so usually the context just tells you which one is intended.
So when
And
it's referencing Yahweh,
right,
will it say Elohim of Israel?
or it may see. I'd have to look at the particular text because I can't recall what it actually says there. So
Yeah.
check for yourself if you have a
Yeah.
concordance. But often it will say things like Elohim Yahweh, right?
Okay. Yeah.
Or it'll use various terms for God in one
Yeah.
context. But I think you can let me make a softer claim and say that Packers' understanding that they thought or they were representing the calf as being Yahweh. I think you can make a really defensible claim, whether it's definitive or not. I think you can make a really defensible exegetical claim that that is what is being claimed here.
Well, either way,
Um,
Yahweh was not pleased. So either way,
yes, and the idea here, the reason why I think Packer would make appeal to this is because what he's saying is it's not just that God doesn't want his people to worship images of foreign gods, but that he doesn't want them to incorporate it into their worship images, even if they're claiming that the image is the God of Israel.
yeah, yeah.
Right? Because and there's a very strong theological reasons for why you would say that.
Well,
Mhm.
let me just is it because the incarnate God is Jesus, and so like we shouldn't try and make material things
It's
into God?
yes,
Does that
because
have something?
it's I think it's basically the claim is that there is nothing in creation, no matter what you chose of all created things,
Yeah,
right?
they're created
Or
from
even
Yahweh.
something from your own imagination, right?
Yeah,
None of it could represent the transcendence of God. Because all of those things, since they are creations of God,
mm,
are necessarily, by definition, lesser than He
yeah,
is.
yeah. That's true.
Right, and so the claim is, I don't care how good you think that this image is, it's going to be insulting to the person of God,
Right.
Yeah,
because it's by definition less than He is.
yeah, yeah,
And so this is why he would say, "Hey, don't do that."
yeah,
Here's the other theological reason that I had in mind, which is that not just that, yes, he knows, God knows that the incarnate Son will be the ultimate representation of who God is, but remember why that is necessary in the plan of redemption, and it's because God already has an image.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
Humanity
Mm,
is made in the image of God, which means that we are intended in creation to be the representation of God on the earth.
Yeah.
Now, because of the fall, we're a marred image of God,
Mhm.
which is why Jesus comes in incarnate and he is the image of God that we were intended, that Adam and Eve were intended to be, but
Yeah.
fell into sin. So yeah,
That word is Elohim, by the way,
yeah.
used in that
So
context.
there's some ambiguity there, but I think you can make the argument that they are trying to make an image
Yeah.
of Yahweh,
Yeah.
and even if that's the case, it's still a gross offense to
Yeah.
God.
Right.
Yeah,
Yeah. Did I ask my other question or did we stop there? There was another question that I had.
I don't know.
Oh, okay. Yeah. We might just like be stuck on this for this entire episode, but we were talking about the angel of the Lord. Has there been when I was reading this and kind of looking at that that the angel of the Lord is Jesus.
Mm-hmm.
Um are there people that don't believe that that is Jesus? And if so, has anybody ever, this might be so stupid, has anybody ever like questioned if there's a fourth um person of the, like, it wouldn't be a trinity
Yeah,
because of the way that it talks
a
about the angel.
quadrinity. I don't even know if
Yeah,
that's a word.
I'm just thinking, like, because the way it talks about the angel of the Lord and it says that it
Hmm.
is God,
Yeah.
especially I think in that you were talking about in Joshua, if you don't believe that it's Jesus, then wouldn't that make a fourth person?
I think that the default, like
Is that
Caleb.
dumb?
No, it's a good question.
Caleb is going to have a better answer to this than I will, but I will say I think the default understanding of the angel of the Lord, whenever he pops up, is that has traditionally been it's just an angel. It's just an angel that represents God. Now, that requires us to ignore a lot of the contextual things and other things that the Bible says about the angel of the Lord when he does pop up.
Yeah.
But Christians have been doing that for centuries,
Yeah.
so
Yeah.
that's not
I,
necessarily
as I've read it in the
yeah,
past, I have um just thought it was
yeah,
like, yeah, a messenger of God.
yeah,
Yeah.
Until you really dig deeper and it's like, well, no, it's calling itself God.
yeah.
Yeah, that there
um so I don't know, I just didn't know what beliefs were out there around that.
from a historical point of view, I don't really know. I mean, Jeremy may be right that in the history of the Christian church, we need to be careful about which context we're talking about and
Right.
what they think about this, because there's of course the Jewish tradition, which is one set
Yeah.
of beliefs, and then of course there's the later Christian interpretation of the Old Testament.
Mhm.
So in the history of the Christian church, it may be the case that there's a strong tradition that just suggests it's just a messenger. I will say though that there is definitely a very strong tradition, and I think it's the correct. It's just so much more exegetically defensible claim that the angel of Yahweh is more than just an angel.
Yeah.
Mm.
And what I said mainly applies to like the layman's understanding
Yes.
of it. I'm not making any kind of claim about formal theology.
Right. Yeah.
But like I grew up Pentecostal, and this idea that the angel of the Lord was like a pre-incarnate Jesus was not really something I was exposed to for a while.
Mm.
Okay.
And I think that that has a lot to do with then you get into uh the difficult and uncomfortable question of how is there a pre-incarnate Jesus appearing to people?
Hmm.
Isn't his incarnation, with the virgin birth of Mary supposed to be the first time he shows up? Now that is based on I think some faulty,
Right.
incorrect assumptions.
He was a man in Genesis, or
Right.
yeah, in Exodus or whatever, and then
Yeah.
becomes a baby
But yeah, but
again
Right.
but see
in
that's
Matthew.
but this is where, this gets into some assumptions about the relationship between s- supernatural spiritual manifestations and physical reality.
Hmm.
It also, I think, has more prominently a little bit to do with a misunderstanding of Christ eternity, right?
Yeah.
His eternal existence,
Yeah.
which is to kind of say that like, well, the simplest way to make that work for most Christians is just to think, okay, well, Christ was like off doing his own thing and like not really interacting with the world for a really long time. And then one day he showed up as a baby. And so we're going to count that like the first time that he was really interacting with physical matter. And this doesn't make any sense theologically, right? Because if, he's there in Genesis 1 in the creation of the world. But This is like the sort of thing that explanation that seems attractive to you if you're uncomfortable or just not informed or haven't studied about the questions of like eternity and Christ's eternal
Right.
existence and
Mm.
things like that, and how we square that with him having a physical existence.
Yeah, and I would say that this, in terms of the understanding these appearances of the angel of the Lord as being more than just a messenger, I think it you can demonstrate this pretty clearly in Jewish tradition that it may be the case that in very ancient times, some Jewish people may not have understood that this was more than just a messenger, but I think you can demonstrate pretty clearly that over time, as Jewish scholars and scribes and so forth meditated on this issue, they recognized the what was in the text really sort of boxes out the idea that this is just a messenger, and so
Mhm.
you'd have this development of theology throughout the Old Testament period, and then by the time of Christ in the Second Temple period, I think you have the full blown point of view that is sometimes called by scholars the two powers in heaven.
Mm.
There's a great book by that title, The Two Powers in Heaven, that sort of maps out the history of this idea. And I don't want to make too strong a claim, but I tell you what, it really looks like. It really looks like something very close to Jewish Benatarianism. Now, that's not a term they would have used, and that might be a little stronger than what it actually was. But I'll tell you, it is this idea that we have the invisible Yahweh and the visible Yahweh, and the Jewish commentators who paid very close attention to the text recognize that in many of these scenes and instances, both are present at the same time, which I think speaks to a plurality in the Godhead, right?
Mhm.
And I don't think there's anything wrong with the idea of saying that this person of the Trinity, as from a Christian perspective, looking back on the text, um, would have been the second person of the Trinity. And the reason why is because that we know from Christian theology, from what Jesus does do in the incarnation, that he is the one who visibly represents the Father, God the
Mm.
Father, to humanity. So yeah, when Moses goes to the burning bush, and it says that the angel of Yahweh is in the bush.
Mm.
Mhm.
And then also in the same passage, it just the angel speaking from the bush reveals the divine name.
Yeah.
I am that I am, Yahweh, right?
Yeah.
Tell Pharaoh, tell God's people that this is who it is, the God of your fathers Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, and also tell Pharaoh this is who is sending you. And this is supposedly the angel speaking, but the angel is saying that he's
Yeah.
Yahweh,
Yeah.
right?
In the text, is it in Daniel? The Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego?
Yes.
Yes.
Is What is the terminology that's used for the fourth man in the
Oh,
fire?
I'm not sure that there is any terminology used. I think it just says that the terminology there, if I remember correctly, is there appears another person in the fire, a fourth
Mhm.
man in the fire, one looking like a son of
Like a
man.
son of man. Yeah.
Which in Daniel, particularly the son of man terminology, is is particularly in Daniel chapter 7, is this very strong theological claim in a vision that Daniel has, which is that he has a vision of one appearing like the Son of Man,
Yeah.
who who comes on the clouds of heaven and is presented before the Ancient of Days, which is God the Father, and
Oh,
he
ancient of
shares
days.
yeah he shares the throne with the Ancient of Days, and the Ancient of Days in the vision gives the Son of Man eternal power,
Mhm.
authority, dominion,
Hmm.
and worship is given to the Son of Man. This is maybe the strongest two powers text in the Old Testament, which is this idea that there is a a power in heaven that shares the throne of Yahweh, that is equal in authority to Yahweh
Yeah.
and receives worship
Interesting.
and dominion from
Yeah.
Yahweh.
I like that.
So yeah, that's the language that's used in that
Awesome.
passage.
All right. I don't know how long I've been going, but I'm kind of scared to. We might want to like break this up into like a part 1 and part 2 video,
Maybe, yeah.
We could.
so we don't go too long. Let's see. This is kind of along the same lines because we're talking about visual representation of Christ. The Shroud of how do you pronounce
Shroud
that?
of Turin.
Turin. What do y'all think? Is it really Jesus?
What do you
It's
think?
real super interesting regardless.
I think it's a real shroud. um,
Okay.
Yeah.
the Shroud of Turin is really interesting because possibly more than any other Christian artifact, it has been scientifically analyzed and scrutinized. And the conclusions from those different rounds of scrutiny are conflicting.
Yeah.
Down to like the textile composition, carbon dating, all kinds of stuff, whether it has organic matter from blood or not. And it depends on who you ask. I had a student write an interesting paper about this one time, or planned to write a paper and maybe went with a different topic. But yeah, it's the history of the debate around this is interesting. And I am willing to believe that the Shroud of Turin is real. So those of you who, if you don't know what it is, it's a burial shroud, or it purports to be a burial shroud. It is a piece of some kind of cloth.
Right.
And apparently, people have said, and if you look at images, you would see why they say that, there is like the um, stain of a human face in it.
Mm-hmm.
And the people who say this is legitimate say this was the burial shroud of Christ, and these are like the blood stains of
Not
his
just
face.
of his face, but of
And
the
his
whole
body.
body.
Yes,
Yeah.
that's
I've
right.
only seen the face.
Yeah,
portion,
the
I
face is
think.
the image that is shared most
Yeah.
often, but it's really
And-
I'm gonna
of
look it
a-
up. I'll
a
share this on
person.
our social
Yeah.
media so people
Yeah.
can see it too.
Yeah, it's a fascinating artifact. And one of the things that this is an interesting debate because it has a lot to do with how we treat the Christian oral tradition and the Christian popular tradition, which is expressed physically through artifacts and relics, right? Especially the Catholic Church and the Orthodox Church has certain relics. And I think as Protestants, but also as people who live in the 21st century, we are kind of skeptical of those, right? Like we tend to take, well, there's no way they would have held on to that, right? Like there was in the early modern period, there were all kinds of fragments of the purportedly that were part of the cross that Jesus was on floating around,
Right.
and some witty person said, well, if you put them all together, this would be a massive cross. There's no so on the one hand, there's all kinds of con men and charlatans and stuff who have been producing these things to make money or whatever. But on the other hand, what I think we need to be open to the idea that there are things that are not in Scripture, things in the Christian tradition that were significant in the early days of the church or at the very start of the church or from Jesus' lifetime, that people through the years valued and held on to and kept track of that might actually be legitimate. And just because it's old and it seems like, oh wow, that would be crazy if it were true, that doesn't mean it's not true.
Yeah.
And in the Shroud especially, there's no conclusive scientific evidence either way. And so it's not a matter of ignoring the science. I think it's a good litmus test for how science pilled your brain has been, or how materialism and skeptical, how materialistic and skeptical you're wired to be.
Yeah.
And that's why it's interesting to me.
I've seen images of it, mainly of the face. I just pulled up a picture of the entire body. It was interesting. So I don't really know much about it to know anything. I've just seen, and here recently I've seen videos of people using AI to
Yeah.
make it, if it is Jesus, what he looks like and stuff like that.
Right.
But that's about all that I've really.
I sort of am on the fence on the question of its authenticity because of what Jeremy mentioned, which is that the scientific analysis of the shroud, I think to this point has been inconclusive. And you will find people argue on both sides and they'll make a case. And I've heard both cases, and sometimes they both sound convincing. People who will argue that the date of the shroud is correct, that it is organic material.
Where did they find it?
Well, the thing is, it's very old.
Yes.
So
This is
it's
one
just
of
been preserved.
so the claim is that it was preserved throughout church history, and that there were certain individuals and even churches that had possession of the shroud. I don't remember off the top of my head. I wanted to say that it was a church, but that could be wrong. So don't quote me on that. But um, within the Christian community,
Yeah.
the from a very long time ago, it's an ancient, a very old artifact. We'll put it that way.
Yeah.
But there is question about, well, how old exactly is it?
Yeah.
Is it from the time of Christ? And there's been conflicting data,
Okay, so that's kind of where.
part of this surrounds the issue of the samples that were tested
Yeah.
and so forth. And there are, I know that there are actively people trying to get more testing done on the shroud so that we can get some more definitive answers.
Yeah.
Um, because there are those who would say, well, actually, it's just a piece of art that was created
Mhm.
later, and that it actually isn't a burial shroud. Some people think that it's a intentionally, fictitious thing. Other people think that maybe it's just a piece of visual art. This
Yeah.
actually does connect in some ways to our question about the veneration of images, right? Because what Jeremy was just saying about sometimes within the Protestant tradition, we're skeptical about artifacts and things that have been, frankly, anything that's been handed down through church tradition
Mhm.
that is not necessarily identifiable within the text of Scripture, right?
Right.
And this relates to the
Yeah.
Protestant doctrine of sola scriptura, right? And I'm actually teaching a class right now on why we're Protestant and not Catholic, and in the next a couple weeks, I'm going to be teaching on why we're Protestant and not Orthodox as well. Um, and one of the major things in both churches, but really particularly in the Orthodox Church, is the veneration of icons, right?
Mhm.
The use of icons in worship. And this is something that was dogmatized, that the use of icons was okay and that it shouldn't be forbidden in the Seventh Ecumenical Council, right? Most Protestants historically have rejected the Seventh Ecumenical Council because of the timing with the Reformation, but also because when the Reformers um, broke fellowship with the church in Rome, and of course the Orthodox Church had already been broken since 1054,
Mhm.
but they said, look, the question that we have is, on what authority is our faith and practice dictated to us? What is it that gives us our rule for faith and practice? What are the sources of authority? Well, from the Catholic tradition, from the Roman Catholic tradition, the the claim is that there's actually multiple streams of infallible rule of faith. So one of the things is Scripture, of course. That's an infallible rule of faith, but also tradition that was handed down orally or even just like historically, right?
Right.
And then the last thing, of course, in their schema is the magisterium, which is the teaching of the church under the papacy. And the Orthodox tradition, they would reject the papacy, but they also would recognize that the tradition, the apostolic tradition, is a source of authority for us. And so I think from our point of view, we are skeptical of things like this, because we have a skepticism of tradition. What I would want to
Right.
say in response to this, I know I'm going on a little bit of a rant, but what I would want to say in response to this is we should be a little bit more balanced on both sides. We should say, yes, the Protestant reformers were correct in saying that things like tradition and the teaching and the magisterium, the teaching of the church or the interpretation of the church, and church history are not infallible sources of practice
That makes
for
sense.
us,
Yeah.
Well,
but they are sources of
yes.
information, and we have to evaluate whether or not those things are
Yeah.
legitimate.
Mm.
And the thing about the shroud, why it's an interesting case study for this is because saying that the shroud is or is not authentic has really, if you think about it, no clear practical implications or theological implications.
Hmm.
This is just, is this a real historical artifact or not? Now, if you want to draw inferences or conclusions about what we should do with the shroud, whether it is or is not real, that's up to you. That has other assumptions. But I think it is perfectly reasonable for a Protestant who largely rejects, the authority of tradition to determine practice and theology to say, well, there's no reason to believe it's not real.
Mm.
Right.
And there's good reason to think that if it were real, Christians would have kept track of it.
Right.
So why should we say it's fake or reject it just
Yeah.
because it's old, right? Like think about like the Constitution of the United States, right? Like we're only, 250 years out from the when the Constitution was produced, the Declaration of Independence, all this stuff. We have these. These are real historical documents, and
Mm.
that seems amazingly remote from us, but there's something that we have made an effort to keep track of, right?
Mm.
If in 1,000 years this country or something that comes out of this country is still around,
Mm.
it makes sense to believe that people would still have kept track of those
Yeah,
documents.
something like the Magna Carta,
Right,
for
the Magna
example.
Carta, even better example,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
And so this is the sort of thing that like I am willing to believe it. If it's wrong, whatever. Like I'm not going to lose sleep over it, but it is
Yeah.
interesting.
So the
Yeah.
answer is maybe.
Maybe,
Like
Well,
maybe.
I
We'll see.
appreciate that.
maybe.
Okay. I'm looking at the other questions and I'm thinking, I'm scared to ask these to you guys because I know how you are. So I feel like maybe let's just wrap this thing up and do a part 2 here in the
Yeah.
next few weeks or something. We can do a part
Yeah.
2
Yeah.
because I still have several questions. I just know you guys.
Sure.
Yeah, fine. A part 2, and maybe you can send in your questions to us.
Yeah.
And that's your call to action. If you want your question heard, send it to us.
Yeah. Let us
We
know.
will do a part 2 of this, and we're waiting on you to respond. So follow us on social media, drop your questions there to us, and we'll see you next time.